Continue our conversation on Stop and Frisk. We've had a lot of feedback from you at home. We want to read one of those comments from somebody who wrote in via Facebook. Robert Alston wrote in saying, I live in the 67th Precinct District and I've been stopped without cause. There is nothing correct about this procedure, he writes, when policing means breaking the law. Now, Bethany, earlier on you spoke very impassionately from the heart, from the perspective of somebody who's been a victim of crime. Couldn't you also argue that some of these people who are being stopped and frisked without cause or without finding anything are also somewhat victims to this whole scenario?
I think there are a lot of consequences of just people living in a society that we all have to deal with unintended consequences of what our neighbors do to each other. Mm-hmm. Every time I go to the airport, I have to go through security. And I worked in government for over 10 years. I was an appointed person for various elected officials. And I'm not a flight risk. I'm not going to blow up a plane. I still am offended that I have to go through all this security, take my shoes off, get patted down or whatever.
But you're not offended at what people have to go through just walking around their neighborhoods?
Listen, I'm profiled by the criminal who attacked me. My sister was profiled. Mm-hmm. My friend was held at gunpoint. She was profiled. Criminals profile their victims. And
yeah, but what happened to you, I mean, what happened to you and to your family members was terrible. That doesn't mean that stop and frisk, therefore then stop and frisk becomes a tactic that's going to make that less likely to happen. And also your
keeping guns off the street.
Your airport analogy also doesn't really apply because everyone goes through security. Part of the problem with stop and frisk is it clearly targets certain people. I mean, the statistics are so dramatic. I mean, last year the cops stopped over 168,000 black men between the age of 14 and 24.
Against the five people I just listed were not white men. They were not white men.
But you still don't target all black people, all black youth.
The police are not targeting 100% of black people.
They stopped and frisked over 100% of the cohort. They stopped and frisked 168,000 black males between the ages of 14 and 24, just more than 10,000 more than the number of black males in the entire population.
Are you telling me that no white men were frisked or stopped?
Very small percentage. 87% of the people stopped and frisked are either young black or brown men. It clearly targets a certain population.
What are the facts, though, with who commits the crime?
And I don't mind, but we're not objecting to law enforcement concentrated in inner city communities of color. We're objecting to this particular tactic, which targets virtually everybody who lives in that community. That's the problem with it. It's not selective, it's not strategic.
You know what it is?
It is indiscriminate.
As the police officer said to me, because
I
asked for an explanation of how this works. You know what he said to me? He said, here's what happens. He says, we're at a precinct X, and he says, we get a phone call that we have a suspect for an armed robbery or whatever the case is. Let's just take white male, so we don't have to go with the black male. White male, ages 15 to 21. In that neighborhood, we then start talking to 15 to 21-year-old white men.
That's not how it works.
And that is how, that is how the police officer,
if it was sparked by a crime, then we would support it. Then it's a real effort to get at who committed that particular crime.
And that's part of it.
Stop and frisk is an indiscriminate program. It's a preemptive program. It's a pre-crime program. It stops everybody, whether or not there's a crime that's been committed.
The people on the streets, and if it gets the guns off the streets, it's preventing crimes from taking place.
What people in the communities will say is, we expect the cops to serve and protect. We feel, given the way stop and frisk operates, we have to protect ourselves from the police.
Tom,
that's what
do you
people
think
are
it's
saying.
right that we as black men have to teach our sons that you will be stopped by the police? No. You will. I don't care if you're a college student. You will be thrown up on the wall. And please don't mouth off to the cop because you may be shot in the back.
You know that I hope that this doesn't offend you as my brother. Okay?
Yeah, you and I are very good friends.
You and I both know that maybe it's up to the family and you as a father to do a little bit better job of making sure that at 12 o'clock on a school night, your kid isn't hanging out in a corner. That's my only point about it, Dominic, and we wind up making this a racial divide.
Andrew, I just want to go on the record on this.
Go ahead.
He's right.
It doesn't make me happy.
There has to be some responsibility in the black community. Babies are having babies. I've said this every night. You cannot walk around looking like a thug and think that there's not going to be a repercussion, because there will. If I'm law enforcement, if I see you with a shirt 5 times your size and your jeans are almost at your ankle and you got on a hat and it's the middle of the summer and you have on a coat, I'm going to stop you. That don't mean I'm going to violate your rights, but there is some black accountability. There has to be some black accountability. Black fathers are not in the household. We've got to fix that.
Legally, by the Constitution, you can only be stopped if there's a reasonable suspicion that you're either carrying contraband, which could be drugs or a gun or knife, or you're about to commit a crime.
But you know the Constitution does not apply to the hood.
I got to jump in and stop it right here because we're out of time. And surprisingly, I don't think we've settled anything. But thank you guys for a great discussion. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
It was nice
We're going to
meeting
take
you.
a quick break.